Alright, fuck an intro. What's good, YouTube? Back again with another video. Today, I wanted to bring up the topic of morality and kind of how I believe that there is no real objective way to really define it or really experience it. I feel like it's more of a subjective thing based on either an individual perspective or a systemic perspective. And what I mean by that is that when it comes to morality and being a moral person, a lot of the traits in which that come with that are more so learned than it being either instinctual or something of that nature. And what I mean by that more specifically is that think of all the things that you have learned that are right and wrong, or have come to know that are right and wrong. Where did all that come from, really? All that has been, learned, whether it be someone telling you, right, or something like that. Like take for example, stealing. Stealing can be considered immoral. It's wrong. It's illegal. It's against the law. The law prohibits people from stealing. If you steal, you will get in trouble. There's a consequence for doing it, right? So for us, that's considered immoral. But what if there was a branching reality where the concept of stealing wasn't wrong, where you could forcibly take from someone and not get penalized or punished for that in the same way in which it can happen to you, right? And now let's say that, again, because that action isn't necessarily penalized, like I said before, would that reality be more immoral than ours because we don't do it because we view it as wrong? What if the people in that branched reality view it as acceptable and just being a way of life? Kind of the same way, in which, like, if we look at animals, like look at the way in which, like, leopards and lions and hyenas, look at how they all interact with in terms of feeding, making kills and all that stuff. A group of lionesses can make a kill, right? And then let's say it's 3 of them. They take the time and effort to they're hunting down some zebra. They manage to separate one from the herd. They pin it down. They kill it. And they start feasting, right? Now let's say a pack of hyenas that are maybe 30 deep, they show up and they scare off the 3 lionesses off the kill and they steal it. Sure, in that moment, right? Like, they stole the kill. In the way in which we view it, that could be messed up for the hyenas to do that. But in the animal kingdom, it's not about whether it's right or wrong. It's more so just a way of life, like accepting that can happen and that will happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the hyena is wrong for doing that, because at the end of the day, it's more so concerned about its own survival, the same way in which the lionesses are concerned about their survival. That's why they hunted the zebra, right? And one is not judging the other necessarily for the actions that they both took upon themselves to commit in that particular moment. Again, they just understand that is a way of life and that is bound to happen. Using the predator kind of example again, the same way in which, if like a leopard has cubs and a lioness sees that, or a lioness knows that the leopardess that it's kind of surveying in the distance has cubs, the lioness will take it upon herself to kill the cubs in order to eliminate future competition, right? Now, again, coming from our perception of our learned sense of morality, we again look at that as that's messed up. Why would they do that? So on and so forth. But again, in the animal kingdom, that is just simply another way of life. The same way in which the lioness would do that to a leopard's cubs, the leopard would in turn do that to the lioness's cubs, right? If the cubs, for whatever reason, were left unattended, because it wants to wipe out future competition as well, especially since a full-grown lion or lioness severely outweighs a leopard and outclasses them in terms of power and strength, right? So it kind of instinctually, knowing that, it takes it upon itself to wipe out the competition early on when it's defenseless. So because both understand that in that situation they would both do the same thing, they just understand that, whether intuitively or instinctually, that's just a way of life. And now if we try and mirror that back into our own society, people doing kind of those similar things, we look at that as extremely morbid and immoral and just unnecessary extreme acts of violence and things of that nature. And sure, we are now in a advanced enough civilization where we don't need to take it upon ourselves to do those kind of activities, because there isn't really any need for them. But can we sit there and say that the way in which those animals interact, is that wrong? Again, you can say it's wrong based on your own sense of morality that it's wrong, but I simply see it as that's just the way of life, the way in which Mother Nature is constructed for these animals in their environment. And then again, kind of shifting back to bringing this towards us as humans. Again, what if there's a branch timeline where a separate reality where some of these things aren't considered immoral and are just a way of life? We can sit there and look at that and say that some of these things are wrong, like I mentioned before, stealing or murder or what have you. But in these separate timelines, if those things are just simply a way of life and you suffer no real consequence for partaking in these activities, then that kind of again raises the question of what can we consider to be objectively morale. And this is where I feel like, again, like I mentioned earlier, you can't really have an objective sense or definition of morality, because that is entirely dependent upon either an individual case or systemic case, like I mentioned before. So you can even take two people and sit them down in a room. They could both consider themselves moral people, but the way they come at morality could be entirely different. And they could both, in turn, completely not understand or misunderstand where the other person is coming from in terms of morality. But to them, does that make their own sense of morality more or less correct or incorrect? Again, that's just your learned values based on your environment and who passed that down to you, or what systems passed those beliefs down to you. So I'm someone where I think unnecessary violence and all these horrific acts and stuff I would consider relatively immoral, because there isn't a real need to do any of these things. And kind of in the same way, it's who am I to sit there and make the decision for myself and someone else that I have the right to enact these things on this person, whether they deserve it or not, right? And that's just kind of my kind of compass of morality. But then someone could come at it from a completely different angle, and it's I don't necessarily find it wrong to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And you could come at, well, I find it extremely wrong to do X, Y, and Z. And again, it's like, who is objectively right in that case? Because if we look at an individual act itself, regardless of whether someone's sense of morality or immorality, the action itself really doesn't have any sense of either of those two things, because at the end of the day, it is just an action. It's whether or not it is immoral or moral is, again, based on the perception of the individual looking at the specific event. But the specific event itself doesn't have any sort of attachment in that regard to it. Again, it is just an event. Same way in which, like, you would view, walking. Walking is, you wouldn't really consider walking having to do with anything that aligns with morality or immorality, because at the end of the day, it's just an action, right? So, and you can put that in the same scope of these things that we could consider heinous and whatnot. Like, at the end of the day, these are just actions, but how you perceive them, they can have negative connotations. Like, a lot of these things in which people can get locked up for or whatever, I view them as extremely wrong, and someone shouldn't do them, and someone should never do them under any context. But someone else can, in their mind, justify why certain things should be okay and other things should not. And again, is that person any less moral right than I am? I can't objectively give an answer to that, because again, morality, I feel, is just how that person perceives, it's mainly more so how that person defines morality and where certain things fall under the scope of morality and immorality. So again, you could look at these different things and define them within these two umbrellas, but still at the end of the day, they themselves can't objectively be defined as one or the other, because there is no objective way to define them, because they are just, like I said before, just actions, right? So that's where I kind of come from with it. Something I've been thinking about for a minute, just kind of like something swirling in my head, like I'll consider myself like a very moral person. Like, a lot of these things that are very illegal, I believe they should be, and you should get penalized for doing them. But again, it's like, imagine out in a world where I was raised where these things were okay to do, or maybe if not necessarily okay, but the fact that they're just a way of life and you kind of just have to adapt to that. What would that look like? And could I say that version of myself is any less immoral or immoral than the version of myself that you're currently listening to? Again, I can't really say, because again, I feel there's no objective way to define morality. Like, can I say I'm an objectively moral person? Like, within the confines of, what we consider to be moral, I would say so, yeah. I obey the law to a T. I don't do anything stupid or illegal that would get me in serious trouble, that would harm others, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, or anything under that umbrella. And I don't believe that anybody should do any of those things to anybody, regardless of whatever. I believe that we should all treat people fairly and love each other, have respect for each other, understand where each other's coming from, and we should all accept everybody for who they are and where they're at. But then again, in a reality where those same values are not shared or practiced, and instead either they're inverse or how we perceive it as like a negative version of that, a more violent version of that, a more extreme version of that those values are being practiced, and that's their everyday life, and that's how these people come to understand the world around them and things of that nature. Can we say that those people are immoral or more immoral than we are. They could look at us and all the things we do and be like, what the fuck is going on? You know, the same way which we view them as immoral for doing these things, they could view us as immoral for doing the things that we do. And again, where can you really say that one is more correct over the other? Which one can you say is more objectively wrong over the other? I feel like you really can't, because it's just all based on your perception of what's right and wrong, and that can change. Like, that can even change from a day to day. Some things you view as, you know, right could change overnight. Some things you view as wrong can change overnight, and you can choose to carry those newfound beliefs for the rest of your life and not see a real need to change your stance on them. And, you know, again, depending on who it is you interact with and, you know, your environment, those things can be celebrated, and you may not view yourself to be any more or less, you know, immoral or immoral. And again, you know, that's why I say, like, there's no real objective way to define morality, because it all depends on where it is you come from as a person, and, you know, what environment you are and what beliefs are instilled in you from being in that environment. But yeah, I feel like that's gonna conclude my video. Again, just had this like kind of idea / concept swirling in my head. Wanted to get some of my thoughts down. These videos are never going to be like coherent or like have like a main line of like, I don't know, like reasoning or something, because these are just more off the cuff, and I like keeping it that way. Keeps it more authentic, like I'm having a conversation with someone. And yeah, it's gonna wrap it up. Let me know what y'all think down below in the comments. Do you guys believe that there is an objective sense of morality, or do you believe it's more like, or are you more like myself, where it's kind of more subjective and more dependent on the person and the environment in which they are in? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna catch y'all later. Peace.